As I approached Tory's chamber, I heard Dionysius's deep and resonant snores over the howling cave winds. I looked in and found Dionysius slumped in a chair, his thick beard resting on his chest. He had wrapped an animal pelt around the length of his body. If I didn't know better, he could have been a sleeping bear sitting in that chair. I thought it ironic that he sat there trying to protect Tory from an illness that, all the while, there was a far worse sickness ready to strike. It was me that Dionysius would have to eradicate so that Tory could survive. I moved cautiously closer and closer to Tory. If Dionysius woke, I would be caught in mid-step with the task of explaining myself. I mentally formulated my answer. I couldn't sleep and I was concerned about him. I wanted to see if Tory was sleeping comfortably. I had the ground-up fungus folded in a piece of animal hide. I slowly pulled the string holding the satchel around Tory's neck. I unfolded the hide into a trough shape, held my breath, and poured the fungus into the open satchel. I then stuck my finger into the sack and mixed the fungus into the herbs. Then I quickly tied the satchel up once again. "Father Ari!" "Dionysius, you startled me," I said, turning to the big monk behind me. "I apologize," he said sincerely. "I seem to have drifted off. How is our patient?" "He seems to be relaxing comfortably. I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else I could do for him." "You are a credit to your robe," Dionysius said, rising to check on Tory. "Well," I said, "all will be returned in heaven." Without touching my hands to my face or other parts of my body, I walked back into the front chamber of the cave and thoroughly washed them in a pool of water. I sat back inhaling my first full lungful of air since I walked into Tory's chamber. I even welcomed the stuffy, earthy smell of the tunnel. I returned to the small chamber Dionysius had given me and put a few more logs on the burning embers. I lay down on what I loosely refer to as my bed. Sleeping on it felt like I had not rested at all. The rock I lay on, although relatively flat, had depressions strewn across its surface that made it feel like a lumpy mattress. No amount of furs, for I had laid 3 on top of one another, disguised the bed as anything other than a cold, hard slab of rock. Thoughts ran through my head concerning the events that led me to this point and the lies that I told that got me here. I was not afraid of any repercussions of my lies. I lied because I was good at it. Lying is nothing more than a frame of mind, a way to believe in another perspective. I was good at it because I could convince others and myself that my lie was the truth. My nerves popped and cracked in time with the sounds from the hearth. My thoughts drifted to Dionysius. This evening I'd had a narrow escape, and there might come a time when I would have to defend myself, or at the very least, fight my way out. Dionysius's large frame and the stamina that allowed him to live in this rugged and dangerous environment, that in turn toughened his body as well as his resolve, could make him a difficult opponent. I needed to make alternate plans of escape, plans to survive. But this land of hell made that impossible. I had to get off of this rock. I needed to stay one step ahead of Dionysius. He had the Creator on his side. I had only myself. I soon drifted off into that other world and dreamt that I was drifting, lost in a snowstorm. Suddenly, a disembodied hand touched mine, then grabbed hold of it. It gently guided me as a father would his child, leading me back to the warmth and the safety of Dionysius's home. Days and nights drifted by with Dionysius Taliriktug and I watching over Tory and caring for the dwelling in general. Mediocrity had replaced what I now defined as an adventure rather than a hellish experience as I'd considered it before. I spent the days standing at the cave's opening and staring into the distant sky. Thoughts materialized on the edge of my consciousness and then disappeared, not really taking any recognizable form. Others drifted into my dreams about the wealth and influence I expected to gain one day. At times the snow and ice and the frigid wind disappeared, replaced with the warmth and comfort of that imagined future time. One morning I awoke from my first real sleep in 8 Dagger. Lying on my slab of rock with a clouded head and stiff limbs, I glanced at the fire. Its high, crackling flames had been reduced to burning embers. I dragged myself off of the rock bed, grimacing through every stiff movement and muscle ache. and tossed another armful of driftwood and dry shrubbery on the hearth. Sparks and tiny embers jumped like thousands of fireflies flying to escape the heat of the renewed blaze. Living and traveling in this harsh environment had finally caught up with me. Seemingly separate events, metamorphosed into parts of my story, I was living a narrative. Whether they were fact or fiction was difficult to keep separate. I was no longer that responsive and energetic person who escaped from the Icelandic authorities. I felt 20 years older. The weight of the burden on my chest took my breath away. But when I thought that the weight of my burden would soon crush me, I felt an infusion of energy. Always the thought of wealth heated my body like a fever. Loud groans traveled on the cave wind coming from the other chamber. They sounded like they could be coming from Tory, although I couldn't be sure. The sounds carried by the wind changed into sometimes unrecognizable forms. I decided to investigate, hoping that today would be that day of my deliverance from this waiting. I entered Tory's bedchamber to find Dionysius standing over him. The cloth satchel had been untied and placed at the foot of the bed. Tory was writhing and moaning in pain. I was secretly hoping that my corrupted medicine satchel had been the cause of it. Dionysius grasped his head and opened his eyelids with his thumbs. Taliriktug stood next to him, holding a lamp that lit up Tory's face. "Can I be of help?" I asked. "His fever is worse, and he has trouble breathing," Dionysius said, as if he had not heard me. "I know that I mixed the correct herbs in the satchel." "I'll check for you," I said, taking the bag from him and walking to the hearth. I held my breath and opened the pouch. I turned my back to them and used my body to conceal the fact that I was pouring the fungus chunks and the herbs into the fire. The dried leaves instantly incinerated in the heat, and the white chunks of fungus shriveled up and disappeared among the ashes. "Are you familiar with the herbs used by the natives of this land?" Dionysius asked. No, but I thought that perhaps I'd recognize what was in the bag." I detected suspicion in Dionysius's voice. I felt trapped in his unbelieving stare. I felt my disguise and my lies begin to dissolve, and I quickly ran through my behavior in my mind, trying to locate anything that may have aroused his suspicion. I noted an air of avoidance in myself. Tory's sudden eruption had caused my mood to change, prompting questions in Dionysius. Our words irregularly danced around each other. I suspected questions he wanted to ask, but I also suspected that he either could not ask them, or that he felt that it wasn't the appropriate time to ask. I saw Dionysius lean over Tory, hover there, examine and dissect his movements and physical condition. His ear moved over Tory's mouth, as if Tory had whispered something. And then, in a moment of rapture, the events that I had set in motion came to fruition. Tory's body convulsed, paused, and then he exhaled his final breath. In a macabre sort of way, his passing saddened me. He hadn't done anything wrong except interfere with my plans. His passive aggression toward me was his only crime. Dionysius gave him his last rites. I didn't know what else to do, so I knelt down next to the rock that Tory lay upon and prayed. I had never prayed before. I began by thanking God for taking Tory's life so that I might live, and then I praised him for his wisdom, comparing my wisdom to his, and all the while congratulating myself for my ingenuity and astuteness. After several minutes of prayer, Dionysius opened his eyes. I had to congratulate him for his theatrics. I had not witnessed a Christian ritual before, but if this was anything like what the practitioners participated in, I could understand how they remained devotees. "What would you like us to do with the body?" Dionysius asked. I couldn't care less, but I had to say something that was in character for a member of the clergy. "The ground is frozen, but we need to bury him. Is a burial at sea out of the question?" "The ocean is a dagger's walk from here. Taliriktug can take the body," he said while pulling the fur over Tory's face. Dionysius turned to Taliriktug and said something that may have been either an order or a request. Taliriktug disappeared into another part of the cavern. Dionysius looked back to me. "A hunting party brought me some things from your ship this morning while you slept." Taliriktug returned from the adjoining chamber with 2 pieces of cargo, a chest that he dragged across the floor by one handle, and a wrapped oblong object almost my height, which he cradled in his arm. I recognized the Icelandic parliamentary seal embossed on the top of the chest. These must have been part of the secret cargo that was hidden from us on the voyage. I was eager to see what had been of such importance that it was kept hidden from the crew. Please assist me, Father Marson, Dionysius asked. He pulled the furs from Tory's body and unfolded a large piece of translucent material that Taliriktug had brought to him. Please roll his body towards you, Dionysius instructed me. I placed Tory's arms at his side and rolled his heavy body toward me. The body was still warm, so if I could imagine that he was still alive and sleeping, it would alleviate any pangs of guilt that I might feel. I realized that fear had surreptitiously attacked me. It was strange. I was fearful of touching Tory's dead body. He was harmless. Why was I so afraid? Dionysius wrapped the body in the white gauze, being meticulous about tucking in the head and the feet. I was hoping to save this for my death, but I can find something else that will work just as well, he said as he worked. Those were the only words Dionysius said to me. He pointed at Tory and instructed Taliriktug to load the body on the dog sled outside. The freezing temperature would preserve his body until we were ready to give him a proper burial. The Thule picked up Tory and carried him out of the chamber, completing the strange ballet that Dionysius had been conducting for the last few minutes. I dragged the chest closer to me. A lock protected the chest's contents, but by the look of it, it was only there for official purposes and to keep out wandering eyes. It wasn't strong enough to keep out someone who was determined to get at the chest's contents. I picked up a rock and gave it a couple of swift blows, and the lock broke in half and fell to the floor. Dionysius sat close by and looked on with interest and anticipation. While he looked on with genuine curiosity, I looked on the chest as a pack of wolves would a caribou. My desires heightened as I imagined that this chest might contain tribute or some of Iceland's treasury. Inside the box was a smaller chest. I pulled the pin from the lock and lifted the latch. Carved into the lid was an inscription. A generous gift from His Majesty King Harald Harfarger of Norway to the Holy Irish Church, taken as the spoils of war during the Norse campaigns. I paused for a moment, that brief moment where the killer looks at his prey, knowing that what follows will change his life forever. Then I lifted the chest lid. My heart sank in disappointment. What lay inside was not what I had hoped to see. It was a book. I stared at it, hoping it would somehow transform into what I wanted it to be. I pulled the hide-bound book from the box that had protected it from the salt air. Springing the latch on the tome, I opened it to the title page and read, "The Book of Kells." I leafed through the book. It was a magnificent collection of illustrations and text, much of which I could not read. For all its beauty, the book didn't interest me. I was after valuable objects, not monks' drawings. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dionysius eyeing the book. His expression was slightly different from mine. I saw interest and love on his face, and wanting in his eyes. "Do you recognize the book, Father?" I asked. "Yes, I do. It is a book written by the Irish monks of Columba." I grudgingly handed the book to Dionysius, preferring to think to the last minute that the book contained some important information that I had missed. I untied the leather ties and unwrapped the animal hide from the other item by rolling out the bundle. Doing so revealed a lance. On closer examination, it was a lance with what looked like a blood stain on its tip. My heart sank further. My disappointment was turning to anger toward Dionysius and his faith. I couldn't even value these artifacts for their religious significance because I wasn't a Christian. I thought I could sell them to the first people I came across once I returned to Oslo. Dionysius probably didn't have any money. I'd have to sell them to a wealthy Christian like a banker or a merchant. "May I examine it?" Dionysius asked, referring to the lance. "Yes, by all means, go right ahead," I replied, nearly choking on my disappointment and anger. Dionysius slowly turned the spear and examined the head of it. He stood and compared the height of the spear to his height. "This is the holy lance," Dionysius said. He gently placed the lance on the dirt floor and opened the book once more. Call it my heightened mistrust in people, but Dionysius's examination of the lance was too quick. If indeed it was religious in nature, he would not discard it so quickly, but rather spend more time marveling at it, turning it over and over in his hands, relishing the moment of touching something that acknowledged his faith. When he looked at me, his eyes held a cutting sharpness that made me feel as if my chest were being pulled toward the tip of a knife. It was a look of suspicion, anger, and outrage. And if my instincts served me, There might have been greed in that stare as well. Taliriktug returned. Dionysius spoke to him in abrupt tones, then Taliriktug left again. My suspicions quickly changed to a certainty that something was going on. I prepared myself for the worst. "Where did you obtain this book?" Dionysius said, his tone interrogative. "I didn't obtain it anywhere. The book was on our ship." As far as I knew, we were on our way to Ireland. At least that's the destination I was given. I was not privy to detailed information regarding our voyage. Until I opened these items from the cargo a few moments ago, I didn't know what we were transporting. I began piecing together the parts of this puzzle. Dionysius's composed reaction to the artifacts, his inquiring looks at me over the last 5 or 6 daggers, and how I'd reacted to Tory showing up. Maybe not the reaction he'd expected from me. I also recognized that my feelings could have been caused by my own paranoia as well. Dionysius slowly turned the pages and remained silent. He scrutinized the pages, either purposely ignoring me or so enthralled in his examination of the book that he didn't hear me. "That would explain the rumors surrounding our destination," I continued. "We were to return the book and the lance to its place of origin." My thoughts spun in my head. The sound of a full purse clinked in my ears. "I'd take the relics back and sell them for as much gold as I could possibly get. Christians would pay handsomely for such things. Even wealthy and greedy clergy couldn't resist owning the artifacts." "Then this must be the Holy Lance, the one that Longinus used to pierce Christ's side," Dionysius marveled, running his finger over the spear tip. "A relic that actually pierced the side of Jesus would fetch hundreds, even thousands times more than the book," I thought. "I must take these relics and complete our voyage," I said. "Yes," Dionysius agreed. "The Book of Kells with the Book of John. I never thought that I'd touch this document." His voice cracked and his hands trembled as his fingers lightly touched each page, as if he were caressing a sleeping lover's skin. "I've been truly blessed with this honor that I may be the one to hold it." Dionysius carefully closed the book and looked at me. "It is time for truth between us, Ari. And you notice that I no longer call you Father Marson." Tory momentarily regained consciousness. He witnessed you leaving the ship's hold before he collapsed into unconsciousness. "I don't... what?" I could do nothing more than stumble over the beginning of an explanation, which Dionysius interrupted before I could finish. He told us the story of Ari, a fellow rower aboard the Nar, and the priest who accompanied the owner and the soldiers. You are not the priest, are you, Ari? I picked up the lance and pointed the tip at Dionysius. "Stay away from me," I warned. "Ari, I am not your judge. You have not done anything wrong save claiming ownership of the book and the lance. Artifacts meant for our holy church. I am here to help you." He extended his hand toward me in charity. I replied by jabbing the lance in the air in front of him. "Step back," I warned. Sidestepping to a rock where my fur clothes lay, I picked them up and grabbed the book. Catching him off guard, I aimed the lance at his chest, intending to run him through. He sidestepped and I missed my intended target, but I did stab him in the arm. I didn't wait for his shock or pain to subside. I turned and ran out of the cave. I knew Dionysius' zealousness would compel him to prevent my escape. I didn't look behind me, but I knew that he was following close behind. "Stop, Ari," Dionysius yelled. "There is no place for you to run. It's not too late. You can still be forgiven if you truly repent your crimes." His voice was lost to the howling winds of the northern storm. No longer protected by the warmth of the cave, I now felt the full impact of my nakedness. I quickly dressed in the fur outerwear and looked for Taliriktug, hoping he was still close by. He would not know what had transpired within the last few minutes. I could quickly dispose of Dionysius and catch up with him. I now realized that my survival didn't depend on outrunning Dionysius, but rather turning to face him. And so I did. A wall of blowing snow partially obscured the cave entrance where Dionysius stood. He seemed to hang in front of me, with the wind circling him and tugging at his crucifix and the ends of the rope belt around his waist. I thrust the spear toward him once again and missed. He deflected the tip and grabbed the upper part of the shaft. With a quick and decisive movement, he twisted it out of my grip and threw it to the ground near the melted snow at the mouth of the cave. I immediately lunged at his shoulder, attacking where I'd previously seen the lance enter his upper arm. He deflected my attack by stepping back, then grabbed me around my shoulders with one bear-like arm while his other hand twisted my head in the opposite direction. Rather than resisting the headlock, I used it to add force. as I slammed the side of my head against his jaw. It took another couple of hits to momentarily stun him enough to twist myself out of the hold, but Dionysius retained his grip on my shoulder and I spun around. The wind hindered both of us. It blew around us in varying degrees of ferocity, and we tripped and stumbled as we sank into the deep snow. Neither one of us really had the upper hand for long. We traded the advantage back and forth as we fought the elements as well as each other. Still clutching my shoulder, Dionysius lunged for the book that I had cradled in my arms with its free hand. We wrestled for the book, wrapped our arms around it, both striving to deny the other sole possession. Dionysius maintained an iron grip on the cover. Struggling to counter that, I grabbed as many of the intricately colored pages as I could, letting what I couldn't grip flap in the storm. Only the tightly bound spine held us together in our struggle. The book was now the epicenter of our greed and rage. We spun around in this battle to own it, tried to kick each other in an attempt to loosen the other's hold on it. The struggle went far beyond the book. It was a struggle for power and our personal war for religious and monetary wealth. There was no letting go. Our teeth were firmly in the book, two alpha wolves struggling for the blood-stained carcass of their kill. "I will not give it up," burst from Dionysius. His voice resonated in the swirling wind. His feet slid closer and closer to the precipice. I used this advantage by reversing my struggling, trying to push him toward the mountain ledge. My rage became as cold and as fierce as the blowing storm. I was caught in the frigid tempest. Dionysius's face remained calm and focused, a product of the peace that he sought on his mountaintop. I didn't think it was fear, although I suspected that both of us experienced that as well. And yet his calm was also deceptive. His lust for the book could not be disguised. He held on to that book out of his greed for faith, just as I held on to it out of monetary greed. "Then you will take death, the only end your greed deserves," I bellowed and lashed out. My foot landed just above his groin. It wasn't hard enough to make him release the book, but it did propel him closer to the ledge. Drifted snow collapsed under his weight. Painted pages fluttered in our faces, and a final wrench tore away the binding, releasing him into the storm. In an instant, Dionysius' expression changed from grief to the terror of his own demise. His weight pulled me toward the precipice. I anchored my foot against a rock that jutted out of the snow. Dionysius teetered on the edge, the lower half of his body dangling and the upper half still on the ledge, but his hold on the book forfeited his stability. I peered into his eyes. My cold, victorious stare crept into his peaceful soul, and I saw a look of terror transformed his face. I couldn't tell if he was in any immediate danger, but any sudden movement from me would cause his death. And then the condition of the book came back to me, as I heard the sewn binding tear once more, each tear a knell, its beautiful images crushed tighter and tighter in my grip. I saw through the wind and the snow that Dionysius was crying. I couldn't tell whether his tears were for the slow disintegration of the holy book or the fear of his eventual death. "You will die, Dionysius." He spoke no words, only gasped for breath. My gaze strayed to his shoulder, where the point of the lance had ripped his habit. The torn cloth flapped in the wind. I saw a healed scar on his arm where a gash should have been. The only blood was a stain on his habit. And then the last fibers of the book and moments of his life tore from my grip. In silence he fell, his body disappearing into the white abyss of the storm. I pushed myself away from the edge and hugged what was left of the Book of Kells. Its wrinkled pages were still crushed in my grip. My hands were stained and the ink leaching out of its pages. Dionysius had taken the cover with him, along with a few pages. I gathered the loose pages strewn across the snow-covered ledge, stacked them together and stuffed them under the protection of my fur coat. My body ached from the ferocity of the fight. Dionysius had strained my muscles to their limit. The stinging wind made my exposed skin sensitive. My arm felt like I'd wrestled Thor, and my hands, bitten and sore from struggling for the book in the cold, bitter wind, had surpassed numb and now were a persistent throbbing ache. I limped back to the cave entrance where the lance had fallen to the ground and searched around for it, but the weapon was no longer there. I kicked the newly fallen snow around thinking that snow had blown over it, but I turned up nothing. The longer I delayed, the farther and farther Taliriktug was getting away from me. I saw him as the key to this cell of ice and snow, my guide across this great white desert. An unnatural howl overloaded my already heightened senses. I whirled around, stopping in an aggressive stance. Taliriktug stood in the cave entrance. He had the holy lance raised high above his head. He shook it in the air, threatening me with it. I was ready for his attack. I didn't want to kill him. After all, he had saved my life several times since my arrival in this frozen land, but if provoked, I would protect myself. Judging from the expertise of his people as hunters, if Taliriktug threw the lance from where he stood, no farther than 20 paces from me, I would not be able to move in time to avoid it. My reflexes were already compromised from my struggle with Dionysius. There was no place of refuge. If he hurled the lance into my chest, it would kill me. I composed myself to face my fate. My muscles tensed and my anxiety increased. Taliriktug maneuvered the weapon in his raised hand, tossing it in the air and twirling it so the head was aimed at me. His arm drew back, then recoiled like the torque on a catapult. As he leapt forward and released the spear, I could see its tip spinning toward me. It struck my chest. I fell backward. With the force of the impact, I lay in the snow, momentarily stunned, waiting for the pain. I thought I had felt a piercing jab or a burning in my lungs, but once I opened my eyes, I felt nothing. I only heard the wind and felt the cold snow under my body. The lance was sticking out of my chest, wobbling in the wind. I couldn't see blood on my coat. I laughed out loud when I realized that the lance had pierced what was left of the Book of Kells that I'd concealed beneath my coat. "I'm alive!" I yelled. I grasped the lance and with one pull wrenched it out of the book. I stood, still hugging the book under my coat. I looked at Taliriktug, who stumbled backward in horror. To him, my survival could only mean one thing. There was magic at work. Taliriktug bowed down in submission. I quickly checked to make sure that the tip of the lance had not entered my flesh. I was surprised to see that it had. The only mark was a small scar where the tip had entered my chest, but no blood and no pain. I approached the shivering Taliriktug and told him as best I could that I would spare his life if he gave me transportation to the ocean and a boat. He agreed. I told him that I was going to enter the cave and warned him that if he left me, I would place a curse on him and his children. He quickly nodded, his eyes wide with fear. I entered the cave. The whistling tunneled wind caught my attention once again. The harmonics had changed slightly. It was as if the wind was trying to speak to me, as if the cave were a mouth and the wind that created the sound the breath. I understood why Dionysius chose this cave. There was definitely a spiritual quality within these rocks. I couldn't understand why I hadn't heard or felt it before. I scavenged anything I could use in the way of food and weapons. I found a pack with a few supplies in it and room for some more, and stuffed into it some dried meat and berries and nuts. I lit a twig in the hearth and took it over to Dionysius's work table, where I examined the instruments and looked through the papers, hoping to find something of value. My eye stopped on a piece of papyrus. It was a map. I stuffed it into the bag, thinking that it could be useful. I'd examine it later. I headed back into the storm. Taliriktug was waiting for me at the entrance. He ran over to the dog sled and roused the team when I emerged. I knelt on top of the packs piled on the dog sled, the spear upright in my hand as the dogs leapt from the beds they had made in the snow. Taliriktug jumped on the back of the sled and snapped his whip. The descent along the mountain path was nearly as arduous as the ascent had been. The sled picked up speed farther we traveled down the side of the mountain. To keep ahead of the sled, the dogs had to run faster and faster, or run the risk of being hit by the heavy wooden conveyance and killed, or at the very least seriously injured. In an attempt to control the sled's speed, Taliriktug dragged his feet behind the sled. It seemed to work, because the dog harness went taut again. If there was a colony of Culdees, as Dionysius had said to the suitor of the land, then I had to head there. I took the map out of my bag and examined it. On first examination, it looked like a map of the Norwegian realm, but with several additions. There was an unconnected landmass on the left side of the page called Groenlandia, and below that Helluland, then Markland and Vinlandia. Between Markland and Vinlandia was Scrawling Land. On Dionysius's map, there was an X drawn at a point on Markland, with a notation at a place called Killarness, King's Ransom. I looked up from the map to scan the mountainous skyline. In the distant mountains I saw gold, rubies, and silver, glowing sapphires and emeralds. The clouds were made of the purest diamonds and opals I had ever seen. I raised my hand, instructing Taliriktug to stop the sled, and showed him the map. He looked at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. I asked him if he knew where any of these lands were located. Pointing at Culdees, I asked him if he knew where this was. After a moment he nodded and said that it was a one-dagger trip suitor from this land. Putting his finger on Helluland, Taliriktug indicated that this was where we were. To get to Markland, he said, I would have to travel by water.